of your lovely faces. Um, I just want to first say that I am coming to you from unceded Ohlone land, specifically the Confederated villages of Losang here in West Oakland, California. I just want to say also that I tend to have a bit of a rambling style. I do my best to connect it. I also find that trying to script a talk is very hard for me. My neurodivergence causes me to start to get very, very nervous, and I do 50 iterations on paper and none of it ends up coming out. So I have a core thing that I want to kind of discuss tonight, but it may ramble a little bit, and I will do my best to make sure that we get to the point. um, I'm honored to be here. I'm humbled to be here amongst the Sangha on this day. I wanted to talk a little bit tonight. It's kind of a three-tiered subject. I'm hoping to not take too much time. I don't know exactly how much time I have, but I'm going to try to keep it tight. I wanted to talk about mindfulness. I wanted to talk about the bardo of life, the bardos of life. And I want to talk about suffering. And I'm going to talk about them kind of all together. I'm going to do my best to hit the points. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm going to do my best to hit the points. And if at any time you want to raise your hand because I missed something or I misstate a point, please do. The Dharma is here for us to clarify our minds, not to just pummel through bad ideas. So one of the first teachings that I ever received is the same first teaching that the Buddha gave his son Rahula, which was the teachings on ethics. And these teachings that I received and that Rahula received revolved around how we engage with other beings in the space of this world, right? That was the start. Of course, the Buddha talked about how we engage with the requisites, right? The minerals and the rocks and the trees and the insects and the birds and all of these things. But primarily first, the Buddha taught about how we engage with others. Now, this is a sangha of a lot of formerly incarcerated people, so I'm going to come from that perspective because that's the perspective I come from as a returned citizen. When you're in the space of incarceration, there are a set of ethics that you live by, right? There are rules that you abide by because it makes you a good citizen of that environment. It means that you are allowed to be in space with others. And it protects you from the consequences that you may receive if you go outside of those boundaries. And in thinking about that environment and living that type of existence juxtaposed against the ethics of Buddhism that I was taught, the starkness becomes very apparent. And when I was incarcerated, it was somewhat problematic to decide to start the practice, to decide that there was a different set of ethics, a different set of principles, values, morals, what have you, that I was going to abide by. But it was the clarity of the Dharma, the clarity of those ethics, the reconnection to my humanity that was so important, and why it was so important that I make that decision. Ethics ethics are a standard of living, right? We live by a set of standards in order to be a good part of our environment. See, this is where I lose the train of thought and I come back to it. Here we go. In relation to the distance between, here we go, the distance between where I was in my ethics of incarceration, where I began my Buddhist ethics, the distance between them, the space between them was a bardo. The space between them was this limbo-like state. It was this space between. And the container of that bardo was created by a sangha of people willing to allow me to dance in this unknown space between. And what they did was they created the boundaries of that bardo so that I could dance in there and figure out how I was going to live by this new set of ethics, while at the same time having to decouple from the ethics I was living by before. And this is the kind of quintessential reality of the Dharma of daily life, right? The Dharma in daily life, and how important it is that we take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, because it is those containers, they create the space for us to learn, to learn a new way of living. So, once I had the space in which to begin to engage in those ethics, what I realized was that the quintessential truth of the Buddhist teachings was that the human experience is the most valuable experience. It's not about disengaging from being human. It's about engaging in being fully human. It's about engaging in being fully human. And abiding by Buddhist ethics, the Eightfold Path, and the understanding of suffering gives us the opportunity to connect most deeply to our human selves, to our humanity. And by doing so, we then are able to reflect the humanity and value of others. And there's a stratification of that value. We start to see the value of ourselves, the value of others, and then we begin to see the value of the birds in the trees and the insects on the ground, and we begin to see the value of the air that we're breathing, and the value of the stone in our garden, and the redwood tree in our backyard, or the succulents that live on my back porch. But it's that initial space that's created by the realization that we suffer, that it is a lack of ethical orientation that creates that suffering, and that there is an opportunity to connect deeply. I lost the train of thought again. There is an opportunity to connect deeply to that human experience if we decide to live in a way that honors that. So, 1 second. So, refuge, bardo, suffering. We're going to go with those three. So, when in thinking about the truth of suffering for myself in relation to ethics, in relation to the bardos of this life, the first iteration for me, the first real understanding that I suffer, the truth of that came from my reflection on the harm that I had caused. It wasn't about how bad I felt. That wasn't where I started to see the truth of suffering. The truth of suffering came from my recognition of the harm I'd caused others. Because at the time I was reflecting that I was still unvaluable. I was not valuable. Suffering was something I caused. It was not something I deserved to connect to about my own experience. And so the relationship to suffering was somewhat still confused. And that moment became a bardo as well, in which, again, the Sangha was the principal driver of creating and helping me to heal. Because what happened is that in that space, in that bardo, the refuge of the Sangha reflected to me my own value when I would make statements and do things that did not value my own experience and did not value my own humanity. And so as I was progressing, and as I think many of us progress through this practice, we find that there is this continuous need to play in that in-between space. And for me, that is intensely scary because it means I don't have control. And in not having control, I begin to disconnect from my ethics in order to gain back some semblance of control, because this is the pattern that I've been in for so long, right? You don't go to prison based on a single decision. There are a billion decisions that happen prior to that thing happening, and they are all connected. And so I lost the thread again. Somebody remind me of the thing I just said.
Feeling of no control.
Thank you. So this feeling of a lack of control and the desire to be back in control would jettison from my mind the ethics that I had been building up, because I still hadn't connected to them as a reality for myself. I still hadn't brought them into my heart. I still hadn't brought them in and realized that I deserved to live an ethical life. I deserved to be valued and to value myself. And so because I hadn't done that, I would jettison that from my mind, try to find another way to get back into control of my environment, and then sustainably create harm for myself and for others. And it was the consistent space created by Sangha that really provided me with that space. So the bardo then, I get through this bardo of finally connecting to a space of value for myself that the Dharma had really given me the empowerment to do. And then I get into a space of, well, now what? Well, great. Now I know I can live ethically, but that means I actually have to do something. I actually have to be an ethical person, right? It's one thing to know what to do. It's another thing to do it. And so this became the next bardo for me, which was, okay, so I now know I can live ethically. So between this space of knowing I can live ethically, how do I get to a space of actually living ethically? So in thinking in that space, I had to realize that I am not the only person connected to my experience. I am not the only being responsible, who is responsible around me, and that I could lean on the Sangha, I could lean on the people around me in order to reflect to me how to live that ethical life. So, boy, that was a lot of words, and I know they were all over the place, but I'm finally getting to a point here. So I appreciate your patience. As Newt said, I am in the midst of a firestorm at work, and my brain is a little low capacity. So I'm going to step back here and organize my thoughts and bring it back to a centralized point of refuge. So I said a lot of words there, a lot about suffering, some about ethics. The truth is that in every moment of my experience, I am going to refuge for something. I'm going to a refuge for some reason, some kind of refuge. Recently, my refuge, in all honesty, has been sleep. I've just been sleeping, right? I've gone to the bardo of sleep in order to escape my current existence, because I'm so overwhelmed by all of the things that are happening in my life that sleep has become the thing I just go to. Come in at 4 p.m. after work, go to my room. I'm going to take a 20-minute nap. 3 hours later, I'm waking up to smells of dinner. And so recently, that has been my refuge. That has been a thing I go to. Is it a refuge that aligns with my health and wellness and the way in which I want to live? Probably not. Rest is important, but I'm utilizing it as an escape from my experience. Whereas, oh, hello, little friend. Sorry, I have a little insect flew almost into my eye. Just gonna let him go. That has been my refuge recently in the pain of my experience, but that's a refuge that does not give me any healing or any real refuge from my suffering. I really apologize. I'm so sorry. Refuge in relation to my suffering and the ethical way in which I want to live. In looking at the thank you, Jody. Thank you for the message. It gives me a pause to catch my breath. Okay. So let's just talk about refuge. I'm going to jettison everything else because obviously my brain can't hold it all. So in my experience with, thank you, Jody, in my experience with refuge, the realization that I go for refuge every day to things that I go for refuge to things that do not serve me, but that is the pattern of my life. I used to go to refuge, the refuge of drugs, the refuge of sex, the refuge of music, the refuge of friends, the refuge of drinking, the refuge of sleep. And all of these refuges served me in escaping the totality of my human experience, but they did not connect me at all to my human experience. They numbed me to the truth of my human experience. And what the Dharma teaches us is that refuge, that the refuge you go to is in part the realization of suffering. The Buddha started his path with a question, a single question, and that was, how do I not suffer? He realized suffering. Suffering became a reality in his existence after so long being numbed to that reality. And so his whole path started with a single question: how do I end this suffering? And for me, in looking at the Buddhist path and at the Buddhist path in my life, it was the realization for me that the things I had been doing had only served to make me miserable, but I couldn't figure out why. I didn't have yet a question to ask about these things. And so when I first related to the Dharma, my question wasn't, how do I feel better? My question was, how do I not feel? That's how I stepped into the Dharma. That's how I came to the Dharma. And one of the first teachings that Sangye, Rinchen, Lama, Losang, Sherab taught me was, there's no escape. You might as well sit down. You're going to need a minute. There's no time. There's no escape. There's no place to go to relieve this suffering you're having in this human experience. There's no other world to step into. It's only here. There is only this. Now what? And so that became my first question was, well, now what? You told me I can't go anywhere and I can't escape, and there's no bardo for me to slip into and ignore it. So now what do I do? What do I do? And so Sangye, the first thing that Sangye was teaching me about were these ethics in relation to refuge. Oh, you don't want to get smacked in the face maybe at some later point? Stop smacking people in the face, because that was a problem I had in prison. I was a bit angry and I did things I probably shouldn't have. So one of the first teachings was, you don't want this, don't do this, right? It's a very basic kind of Mickey Mouse law of cause and effect. So these very, very small principles. And I said, well, but that's something I do. So how do I just stop doing it? Well, there's these practices that help you to understand why doing those things are problematic. It's not just that you hurt others, it's that it reflects back, and in the law of cause and effect, you create the negative circumstances for your future. Well, that was a whole lot of metaphysical talk that Sangye was throwing at me. I said, you got to simplify it for me. Okay, here's this guy. His name was Siddhartha. He did this thing. Here's how he did it. I said, okay, that I can get with. There was a guy who did a thing. Cool. Got it. I can get with that. Okay. He wrote it down. Well, we wrote it down. He spoke it. Bunch of people wrote it down. Here's some of it right here. Okay, I got something I can study. Cool. I'm a wonk. I can get into the nitty-gritty of things. Great. Awesome. There's this group of people that's going to hold you accountable. No, thanks. Nah. All right. See you later. Bye. Had enough. That's enough. I would rather not be perceived. Thank you. Because I'd been operating in this place that I do it. It's me. It's my life. I'm in control. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. If the Buddha did a thing, cool. I'll check him out. And if they wrote down what he did and he talked about it and I can look at it and figure it out, cool. I will do that. But I don't want anybody perceiving me. I don't want anybody looking at me. I don't want anybody trying to tell me when I'm doing something I shouldn't. I was living in enough shame, even though I didn't know it yet. I didn't understand it to be shame. I was like, no, I don't want that. I don't want that. But Sangye, as just the beautiful human they were, looked at me and said, well, we're already doing it in this moment. You've been perceived. I am talking to you about this thing in relation to these things that you do that you know that you shouldn't. We literally just had the conversation. And it struck me in that moment that I had been helped along for so long without realizing it. And it both crushed me and liberated me. The realization that this refuge of connection had been present for so long without me connecting to that connection in here, that it had been there for so long and I felt like I had missed out. But then there was the other side of it, which was, if this connection has been present my whole life, if this thing has been a reality the whole time, then it's a reality now. And if I just decide to allow those who are on this ethical path to see me, if I just trust them enough for that, that I might be able to be better. Not perfect, not good even, but better. And that felt like suffering. It felt like suffering. And it took me so long, and it's still to this day, it sometimes feels like suffering. The difference is that it feels like an understanding. How do I want to say this? It feels like I finally understand that the suffering that I feel and experience is not solely my own, doesn't belong to me. It doesn't exist only for me. So refuge. Because that suffering doesn't just exist for me, then I can trust that what the Buddha said and did can be true for me, and that what others in the Sangha, like this Sangha, are doing and saying in relation to me are true. That they're real, that they exist, that they're true, and they can be true for me. So, choosing to take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Buddha because he was a guy, he was a human who did it. He did a thing, and I've done a few things that he's done, and it's worked. Okay, I've come this far, I'll trust to this far, and I'll try the next thing. I'll take refuge in that. The Dharma, right? I'll take refuge that the Buddha exists and that Buddha, the awakening, exists, that it's possible. Take refuge in the Dharma. There's this set of principles that I can live by that might relieve my suffering. Well, that's true. I am a happier person today. I feel like I suffer less, or that I relate to my suffering in a more completely human way. And then the Sangha. Well, this is a group of people who are also relating to their experience in a fully human way. Nancy, you just came back from a retreat, right? These practices we dive into in order to be able to connect to the deepest parts of ourselves in a container created by this group of people who are also on a path, this ethical path. Boy, I feel like I finally got on a thread here. Bruce and Jill, it's really good to see your faces. By the way, you're centered in my screen, and it just you're giving me some anchoring right now, and it feels really good. So, in relation to the truth of this refuge for me in my day-to-day life and in our day-to-day lives, the fact that we have come to this point and found that these refuges have some value, right? How do we, when we are in a space where we are not mindfully connected to that refuge, there we go, where we are not mindfully connected to it, right? We practice these Buddhist practices, so we're connected to them, tacitly connected to them all the time. But when we're not mindfully connected to them in our day-to-day life, how do we reconnect to them when it feels difficult, when it feels hard, when it feels like you just want to lay down on the couch, or you just want to eat the thing, or you would rather go break open that bottle of whatever that you've been saving in the back of a cabinet because you don't know if you can ever let it go? How do you reconnect to your refuge? What do you do when you're in that space of unknowing? That can be extraordinarily difficult. It's certainly difficult for me. It's been difficult in my current experience with work and in my life experience. That's a personal question for you, how you do it, how you reconnect. From my experience, the thing that has been most critical to reconnecting me to my ethics and to my refuge has been the reminder when I walk into my space in our home, when I walk into my space in our home, when I see my altar, when I see my mala hanging on the wall, when I see the picture of this Sangha that I keep in my room, when I look at the Sangha that I had in prison, these reminders, these points of connection that remind me of who I actually am and what I am really capable of when I connect to my humanity in these deep, meaningful, beautiful, scary ways. But even when I see them, sometimes I'm like, Dad, don't look at me. Don't perceive me, right? It's the Harry Potter picture that moves. I think your eyes are moving. Don't perceive me. I don't want to see my altar. I don't want to see that picture. I don't want to see my mala. I don't want to do it. I need a container. I need a way. I need a connection. I need to build up the habit of connecting to it. So for me, the way I do that is I step into, and I know for some people may be questioning my use of the word bardo. These are personal things for me, the way I'm using these words. There are very religious and specific ways of using bardo. I'm using them for me. For me, the way to reconnect to those things is that in the moments when I am feeling most lost or disconnected, is that I allow myself to stop and mindfully connect to the suffering I'm currently feeling. I stop, and as scary as it is, and I'm even tearing up a little bit because I did this today for myself, it was really hard. Stopping and just allowing for the feeling that I'm feeling to be present, and to create for that feeling the same container that my sangha creates for me. To be gentle and mindful with that feeling so I can be wholly connected to my human experience in that moment. And by doing that, even when it's scary, it's deeply empowering. It is for me now, it is almost an instantaneous relief of fear, because of the fact that I can see it, because I can feel it, because I can perceive it, not through the conditioned way I have perceived and lived with my suffering in the past, but through the lens of that Dharma container, through my refuge. I can look at it and I can see it and I can be gentle with it. I can welcome it in. And like Milarepa did in the cave, I can welcome in my demons to the fire beside me. I can put my head in the lion's mouth and not be afraid. This is the power of the refuge that I take. It allows me in those moments when I'm disconnected from my ethics, disconnected from my human experience, and even disconnected from my refuge in some ways. There is this ability. There is the practice. It exists. It is a reality. And stepping into this, again, a word that I use this way, this bardo of feeling, where it's not my feeling, right? It is a feeling in a space that I am creating so that I can see it for what it is. And just by allowing myself to do that, I am free. Maybe I don't feel free in the moment, but I am free in that moment. And it is the consistent reminder of that, the consistent replay of that, and the consistent reconnection to my refuge and the practices that remind me that I am free. Whew. Finally got on the thread. And so I'll try to close this up now. These practices and the ethics that come with them, because the ethics are a primary principle in these practices, how we exist in the world. They give us the opportunity to release all of the masks, to release all of the costumes that have been placed onto us and the costumes that we have placed onto ourselves. They allow us to release the bonds by which we have been constrained, both the ones we have chosen to put on, whether tacitly or mindfully, right? It allows us to release those bonds. And it also, on the positive side, it empowers us to be our full selves, to engage in this human experience, not as passive observers, but as full participants. to understand what anger looks like and to smile at it and to smile at fear when we're afraid, to know what pleasure feels like in the body and not have to chase it anymore, to understand what it feels like to be wholly and completely connected to another human being or another being in general, to be connected to our environment in a real and beautiful and unconstrained way. These practices do that for me because I choose to do them, even when it's hard. And the container of my refuge allows that to be possible. Because every day it gives me the opportunity to leap into or walk into or nap into a safe reality in which to be human. That's what that refuge does for me. It is the roof over my head when the storm is happening. It is the safe space for me to curl up when I am tired. It is the power and the determination that helps me toward a victory for all sentient beings. That is what it does for me. And so after all of that long-windedness and winding path to get here, I just want to say thank you all so much for letting me verbally process in order to get back on the thread after a very long and hard day in a string of long and hard days in a string of long and hard weeks. It is only in this safe container that it could be possible that I could step in and fumble and feel around in the dark of my own mind in order to get to a place where I could tell you the truth of my experience and share it with you and share in it with you. So I'm deeply grateful for all of you. I want to just close by saying, remember that you, as much as any other being in all of the 10 directions, are deserving of your own love and compassion. So never, ever forget that. Newt, just cut off the first part of my talk from the recording, okay? Just like lop that off. Just start where it starts.